Hello everyone, let's start with the new topic, contribution of anthropology in understanding political movements. And this topic belongs to UPSC anthropology. So political movements, the movements that have some political demands, they have often been studied through the lens of political science, law and economics. But when they are studied via the anthropological lens, also known as the political anthropology, it offers a distinctive perspective that helps us understand the movements, the process of mobilization via cultural, symbolic, or everyday lens. So, in other words, political anthropology asks some deeper questions. Uh, First one is, how do people perceive power? लोग power कैसे देखते हैं? Especially the people from distinct biostrata, such as the tribal people, the scheduled caste people, the indigenous people, women, some micro section within a larger mainstream society. So वो उनके लिए power क्या है? जैसे एक मेन स्ट्रीम सोसाइटी के लिए या एक पॉलिटिकल पार्टी के लिए पावर डिफरेंट चीज, इट्स लाइक ऑक्यूपेशन ऑफ पब्लिक ऑफिस, बट उनके लिए पावर कुछ और हो सकती है। एक राजस्थानी सोसाइटी में फॉर वीमेन ग्रुप पावर कैन बी द रिलैक्सेशन इन द नॉर्म्स ऑफ वेल, घूंघट प्रथा में कुछ रिलैक्सेशन हो जाए, सो इट विल बी मैटर ऑफ पावर। सेम इंडिजिनस पीपल की बात करते हैं, ट्राइबल पीपल की बात करते हैं, तो इफ दे आर रिलैक्सेशन इन फॉरेस्ट राइट एक्ट, तो वो भी एक पावर है। Then the second question asked by critical anthropology is how do symbols shape resistance? क्योंकि अब हर कोई भगत सिंह नहीं है, हर कोई रेवोल्यूशनरी नहीं है, हर एक के पास वेपन्स नहीं है, और हर एक के पास उतनी फिजिकल प्रोवेस नहीं है कि माइटी स्टेट को रेजिस्ट कर सके या मेन स्ट्रीम पावर को रेजिस्ट कर सके। तो ऐसे में हाउ डू दे रेजिस्ट? फिर एक आंसर तो यही पे दिया रहा है, symbols, they use symbols. So how do the symbols that is employed by them, employed by such groups, help shape the resistance? Symbols कैसे? Like आप लोगों ने बहुत सारे जो लोग क्रिकेट देखते हैं उनमें देखा होगा कि some people wear black bands on their wrist, on their arms. So this might be a subtle form of resistance. तो ऐसे ही कई सारे symbols हैं, and कुछ ट्राइबल सिंबल्स हो सकते हैं, कुछ उनके कास्ट सिंबल्स हो सकते हैं, रिलीजन सिंबल हो सकते हैं, सेक्टरल सिंबल्स हो सकते हैं, एंड दे these symbol hold some significance. And the third question, why do communities choose certain forms of protest over others? So as I already said, the people who are seeking demands, not all of them are revolutionary. Again, राजस्थानी विमेन का ही लेते हैं, तो राजस्थानी है जो नॉर्दर्न हिंदी हार्टलैंड है, वहाँ पे अभी भी घूंघट प्रथा चलती है, the practice of veil. So those women, they want to protest, they want some relaxation in this norm, but they are not revolutionary and they will not resort to such an action because they have the responsibility of the family, their children, and any revolutionary or violent form will not achieve the purpose. So अब यहाँ पे उनके पास जो protest होगा, the form of it, it will be different. Like they are taking care of family. Now, uh, they may resort to this actions like some leniency or some laziness in domestic chores. So this laziness, like food is not prepared on time, then they are not looking after certain secondary duties. Secondary duties है, primary duties तो obviously they will look after it like children वगैरह, but secondary duties है, उन पे उनकी laziness होगी। तो ये एक hypothetical situation एग्जांपल मेरी तरफ से, but हर एक community it has its own form of protest. कुछ लोग जो है like workers, um, they drag their feet. A phrase drag their feet means again laziness, कि workers हैं, they are protesting against their owner, तो ऐसे में they will not stop the work, but the production, the whole process, it will be slower. तो ऐसे बहुत सारे हैं, like जो अम्ब्रेला मूवमेंट हांगकांग का, तो यहाँ पे ये भी एक डिफरेंट मूवमेंट है। तो why do people are choosing this form of protest? The political anthropology जो है it answers these questions. Now, the first subsection, anthropology's holistic understanding of power and politics. So, one of the foundational contributions of political anthropology lies in its holistic and culturally embedded understanding of power. Here, anthropology understands power, political process, the political mobilization holistically, means comprehensively from inside and via the cultural assembly, while the cultural angle. And herein lies the difference between the contemporary sciences. So, unlike conventional political science, which often confine its analysis to state structure, legal system, and formal institutions, क्योंकि जो political science में जितने भी studies हैं, especially about political mobilization, political protest, all of them they will be in comparative nature, comparative and legal nature. Like they will एनालाइज द स्टेट स्ट्रक्चर की स्टेट में कहाँ प्रॉब्लम है पावर जो है डिवॉल्व हो रही नहीं हो रही है if legal system they are fit enough if formal institution they are doing their duty. On the other hand, anthropology it approached politics as a lived experience that is shaped by social relations belief cultural practices and history. So in short, anthropology approaches politics via the angle of lived experience, via the angle of life, how people in general, how everyday scenario of life shapes politics. Now, politics beyond the state. So, anthropologists argue that political life is not restricted to state mechanism, like the state institution, parliament, administrative machinery, legal system, law, courts. So, the restriction is not there, and even if it is restricted, this might be seen through the political angle, through the angles of political science or international relations. Anthropology, they argue the other, they argue the contrary. And according to them, power, authority, decision making, they exist even in stateless society. State जहाँ पे गवर्नमेंट नहीं है, तो स्टेटलेस सोसाइटी में भी पावर होती है. एंथ्रोपोलॉजी के स्टूडेंट्स जानते हैं. And such power operates through customary, informal, and symbolic channels. वो भी सब जानते हैं. Now, the anthropological research revealed that kinship system, clan structure, village council, and rituals often perform the function of governance. We have seen it a lot in many tribal society where and the state mechanism is not there, administrative system is not there, the governance skeletal is not there, but वहाँ पे भी जस्टिस है, वहाँ पे भी लॉ है, वहाँ पे भी कोड है, वहाँ पे डिस्प्यूट रिजॉल्व होते हैं, वहाँ पे भी स्ट्रक्चर है. So anthropology it brings in new dimension that it is not just about state. Then there is a pioneering work of Evans Pritchard on the Nuer of South Sudan, who demonstrated that despite lacking a centralized government, the Nuer maintained political order through segmentary lineage system. Where there is another study, Mayor Fortes, who studied Talensi of Ghana and highlighted how ancestral worship, ritual authority, and elder council sustain cohesive political social life without formal legal codes. So you can see the two examples here, Nuer of South Sudan and Talensi of Ghana. In both the example, there is no centralized government, no formal legal code, but still justice or political order it is maintained through their customary laws, through their customary institutions. फिर इंडियन context देखते हैं kinship and authority. In Indian tribal societies such as the Gonds, Santals, Naga, they often organize political life around clan leadership, elder council, and village assembly. So this elder council is known as Khang among Nagas. And these informal form of governance, they are not remnants of the past, but they are dynamic institutions that continue to fill the space that is left by modern state. There is another example among the whole tribe of Jharkhand, conflict resolution and community decision, both of which are in political nature, they are still made through customary panchayats. Means the source of dispute resolution, the source of political order, it is the ancient custom, it is the societal custom which function parallel to or dialogue with formal state institution. Then let's move on to the roles of rituals symbols, and the performance of power. Anthropology also emphasizes the symbolic and performative dimension of political power, which is that political power it also stems via the use of symbol and performances. In authority, it is not just enforced through law or coercion, which is a modern conception. Through the ancient time, through the times millennia, the authority it has been often legitimized through rituals, myths, festivals, bodily expression, or in short, social customs. And there is an example. For instance, the crowning of a village headman in many tribal society may involve rituals that invoke divine sanction, ancestral spirits, and communal blessings. So this is a fusion of modern political institution along with the ancient social practices, thus embedding political leadership in the spiritual and cultural legitimacy. And yes, this has been uh, one of the pioneering work of anthropologists, so that tribal culture जो है वो मेन स्ट्रीम में आ सके, at least they accept to certain mainstream ideas. Like मैं आपको एक एग्जांपल देता हूँ. um, ये है एग्जांपल राजस्थान के डूंगरपुर का. डूंगरपुर एंड बांसवाड़ा बोथ आर द प्राइमरीली ट्राइबल एरियाज. तो वहाँ पे वैक्सीन हेजिटेंसी बहुत ज़्यादा थी. वैक्सीन हेजिटेंसी भी नहीं कह सकते, वैक्सीन रेजिस्टेंस. पीपल डिड नॉट बिलीव इन मॉडर्न वैक्सीन, मॉडर्न मेडिसिन से. तो ऐसे में सम एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट वर एम्प्लॉयड, और फिर दे केम अप विद अ सॉल्यूशन that these people are going to take up medicines, or these people are going to take up the facilities of modern medicine, modern hospitals, only if you club the allopathy with their shaman, with their spiritual practices. So a local shaman was called in. तो उस टाइम पे एक हॉस्पिटल बेड पे पीपल, हॉस्पिटल वार्ड में द पीपल दे वर बीइंग क्योर्ड बाय मॉडर्न डॉक्टर्स, और उन्हीं के बीच में शैमन ही वाज परफॉर्मिंग हिज ओन प्रैक्टिसेस. तो यहाँ पे इस मर्जिंग से, इस फ्यूजन से बांसवाड़ा और डूंगरपुर में नाउ बहुत सारे जो ट्राइबल पीपल हैं, दे आर एक्सेप्टिंग मॉडर्न आइडियाज, दे आर एक्सेप्टिंग मेन स्ट्रीम आइडियाज. तो यही चीज़ जो है एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट हैव सजेस्टेड, स्पेशली फॉर इंडिजिनस पीपल, कि जो यहाँ पे क्राउनिंग ऑफ विलेज हेडमैन है, ये भी किसी सोसाइटी का एग्जाम्पल है, मे बी फ्रॉम नॉर्थ ईस्ट और फ्रॉम सेंट्रल इंडिया, जहाँ पे जो पर्टिकुलर सोसाइटी है, दे वर persuaded to enroll themselves for village council, for local elections. ऐसे में उन्होंने मना कर दिया कि नहीं, हमारे पास ऑलरेडी हमारी एल्डर काउंसिल है. तो यहाँ पे ये चीज काम है. अ shaman was called, where the village headman, it was crowned in the same way ट्राइबल पीपल के अंदर, उस ट्राइबल सोसाइटी में जिस तरह से एल्डर को इलेक्ट करते हैं with drum beats, with divine practices, divine performances, वैसे ही सेम तरीके से विलेज हेडमैन वाज क्राउंड, और इस तरह से वो सोसाइटी जो है इट टुक अप द पंचायती राज इंस्टीट्यूशन. तो यहाँ पे यू कैन सी, वैसे हम लोग बात कर रहे हैं पॉलिटिकल मूवमेंट्स की, बट दीज एग्जाम्पल एनालगस कि protest movement में, even political mobilization में भी such cultural idioms, metaphors, symbols, performances, they also employed to challenge authority and assert demands. Now the relevance to contemporary governance. So this anthropological perspective has practical implication, especially in area where state legitimacy is weak, contested, or remote, such as the tribal belt, forest area, or borderlands. So यहाँ पे these are the customary institutions that mediate disputes, mobilize people, and maintain order, along with the formal institution, along with the state machinery. So here, policymakers and development agency must therefore understand and engage with this local form of governance. And moreover, the recent resurgence of indigenous movement across the globe, such as in Amazonia or Northeast India, they reflect a continued reliance on cultural framework of political authority. So cultural framework means which is culturally relativistic perspective, wherein each such group, whether it is indigenous group, tribal group, or any sectoral group, all of them they have their own cultural phenomena and by which they will assert their demand, by which they will seek their political authority. Now, ये जितना भी बताया है, जितने भी sections हैं, उन सबको elaborate form में देखते हैं. First, understanding political movements as a cultural expression. So anthropology provides a distinct and valuable lens for understanding political movement, which are not just rational reaction to economic inequality or legal injustice, but anthropology believes such mobilization, such movements are deeply rooted cultural expression of identity, resistance, and collective memories. And one thing is there, it's about mainstream versus others. Mainstream versus other. And since एक वीडियो में पोस्ट मॉडर्निज्म जब आपको पढ़ाया था, especially the one from anthropology, so the post-modernist ideas, they have started challenging the mainstream ideas. The mainstream ideas of universal truth, of grand narratives, of meta narrative. तो ये ideas जो हैं, they are no longer working because यहाँ पे जो मेन स्ट्रीम आइडिया ऑफ प्रोग्रेस है, इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट है, सोसाइटी है, सोसाइटल प्रोग्रेस है, टेक्नोलॉजिकल प्रोग्रेस है, अब ये सब आइडियाज हैं, दे आर नॉट fitting in, you know, the ever growing society, especially that society in which different people, different shades of people are existing together. So यहाँ पे when the mainstream idea is trying to homogenize, is trying to bring uniformity in everything, certain people, certain sections, they want to maintain their distinct identity. They want to maintain their diversity. So it is a, a fight between uniformity versus diversity. People, they have had a taste of mainstream ideas. They have had taste of technological progress, globalization, consumerism, but now they are fed up with it. Main idea that are finding in the political movements, it is the dispute between uniformity and diversity, the friction between it. And people, even if they have chosen certain mainstream idea, yet they do not want to get diluted. They do not want to erase their identity because of these mainstream ideas, because of these modernist ideas. So that's why postmodernism, it is finding its roots in modern philosophy, modern political literature, arts, anthropological philosophy, and यही political anthropology भी यही कह रहा है that all of these political movements, they are expression, they are cultural expression of identity, resistance, and collective memory. Now, beyond materialism, the moral and symbolic dimension of products, mainstream political science often treats political movements as a utilitarian struggle over resources, power, and representation. So it is the myopic political lens which sees all such movements as the demand for resources or political power or representation. But anthropology, it looks the other way. It expands this view by examining the moral universe and symbolic vocabulary of these political mobilization. So, political mobilization from an anthropological standpoint, it involves redefinition of selfhood, of community, of dignity by using myths, rituals, and symbols as a vehicle of expression. Now, the meaning of this overall passage in short is that anthropology, it sees the political mobilization as reassertion of the native identity, reassertion of selfhood, reassertion of the true identity, और दूसरे और शब्द में कहें, they are resisting this tendency of uniformity. They want to preserve their own identity in the gust, in the storm of globalization and uniformity. For example, for instance, anthropologist Victor Turner, he emphasized how rituals of crisis and communitas can foster a deep sense of solidarity during social upheavals. So which means जब social upheavals होते हैं, whenever um, times when are not good for social solidarity, like war या pandemic या colonialism, तो ऐसे जो events होते हैं that affect a society together, तो ऐसे में there is a deep sense of solidarity between people, फिर यहाँ पे विक्टर टर्नर का आइडिया the rituals of crisis and communitas, both of them they find a place here. कि when people, when all people of a group, a society, they are threatened by a certain danger, so all of them they will come together. जैसे इंडिया में भी, India is a highly diverse society and British they ruled it for 200 years. लेकिन जब ब्रिटिश ने पूरे इंडिया के हर एक सेक्शन को अफेक्ट करना स्टार्ट किया, हर एक सेक्शन को एक्सप्लॉइट करना स्टार्ट किया, देन पीपल केम टुगेदर. तो ये जो कमिंग टुगेदर है एंड देन द रेजिस्टेंस, दे आर नथिंग बट रिचुअल्स ऑफ क्राइसिस एंड communities. Then movements, they are not just tactical or strategic, they are not political as per political science. They are emotional, expressive, and performative that draw on cultural tradition to create meaning and legitimacy, which again means that they want to preserve what they belong, what they believe is theirs. The cultural identity, the social identity, the belonging to the motherhood, all of them, they are deeply possessive ideas. And it's good for any society or any mainstream political party or mainstream constitution not to stifle with people's possessive ideas, such deeply possessive idea. Now, the case studies, the American Indian movement and the Red Power activism. So, this movement, which was founded in the late 1960s, it appears on surface as a civil rights campaign demanding land, justice, and recognition. However, the anthropological insights they revealed that this movement was deeply rooted in indigenous cultural revival and traditional life base. So yes, यहाँ पे again the concept of Victor Turner that a whole society is being is feeling that they are threatened by something external. In the same way, आज की जो modern society है, जो modern tribal groups हैं, indigenous groups हैं, they felt threatened by the waves of globalization, waves of modernization, waves of mainstream ideas. तो ऐसे में यहाँ पे American Indian movement, यहाँ भी जो cultural group है, it was felt threatened by the influence of external forces, and that's why they wanted to revive their culture. So this American Indian movement was response to such cultural erosion. Where again, second case study, the Rastafari movement. This movement emerged in 1930s Jamaica. It was more than a spiritual path. It was a political and cultural assertion against colonial expression, racism and identity erasure. और ये सब insights जो हैं वो anthropology ही दे पाया है. And anthropologists have shown how Rasta practices like growing dreadlocks, जो लंबे लंबे बाल होते हैं with locks, adopting biblical African names, and resisting Western norms called Babylon, they became symbolic acts of decolonization. Because Jamaican people, they want to resist against this colonial burst, this colonial exhaustion, and symbolic universe में, the music of Bob Marley, the raga culture, all of them amplified the message globally, turning art into activism. So here, Rasta's embrace of Haile Selassie as a divine figure, it reconnected Afro-Caribbean people with African past. So again, you can see here, they wanted to reconnect with their past, a thing of their motherhood, which only a student of anthropology can understand. That how people uh, want to stay in the cozy comfort of their mother, how certain things, certain identities, uh, certain ideas, certain cultural practices are deeply possessive, are deeply dear to somebody, and it would be better for everyone not to stick with these ideas. फिर बात करते हैं song, symbols and dress. So throughout history and across culture, political movement has used dress codes, public ceremonies, slogans and visual symbol post a unity and articulate dissent. तो ऐसे में जो mainstream political science है, it does not understand why people like जैसे हांगकांग की बात करते हैं तो वहाँ पे वो येलो अम्ब्रेला अम्ब्रेला जो है अम्ब्रेला मूवमेंट लोग जो है वो अम्ब्रेला क्यों यूज कर रहे हैं वो व्हाट दिस सिंबल मीन्स फिर सेम जो येलो वेस्ट मूवमेंट इन फ्रांस है तो यहाँ पे भी why people are wearing yellow vests. So these symbols they can only be figured out by an anthropologist. And time and again people have used such symbols to articulate their dissent. From tribal uprising that invoke ancestral spirit to student protests that reclaim public space with graffiti and music, anthropology helps decode this non-verbal language of resistance. And it is only anthropology which can decode these messages. Or you can see here example, red flag in peasant movements, and again, the red flag with the scythe or sickle in case of the Marxist ideas, the communist, then blue color in Ambedkarite, and leafy branches in Adivasi people. So all of them, these non-verbal cues, they are not just arbitrary. They are they carry layered meaning, which uh, which are rooted in collective memory and they have certain significance. Now, everyday resistance and subaltern. Then one of the most significant contribution of political anthropology is emphasis on everyday form of resistance that is called the subaltern politics, where people they resist quietly, often in unnoticed way, in which marginalized people push back against domination. These cues reveal how power is contested not only in legislature or battlefield or in open streetway, but in rice fields, kitchens, festivals, conversation, places of everyday movement. Now, James Scott and the theory of everyday resistance. So, anthropologist James Scott, who theorized uh, such invisible power, form of power struggle in his influential work, Weapons of the Weak. So, his work, his case study is based on fieldwork in a Malaysian village where Scott argued that peasants under oppressive system often resist not by confrontation but by subtle means slight or invisible everyday acts. Such acts include work slowdown, calm, धीरे कर रहे हैं. Feigned ignorance means they usually ignore uh, the orders, then gossips and ridicules behind the back, foot dragging and passive non-compliance. तो यहाँ पे अगेन जो फैक्ट्रीज में होता है बहुत सारे जो वर्कर्स हैं व्हेन दे वांट टू रेजिस्ट अगेंस्ट देयर ओनर तो वहाँ पे भी वो काम स्लो कर लेते हैं तो यहाँ भी ये जो है these subaltern acts they are one way of the political assertion. So these via these individually small acts people can collectively undermine the authority of landlords, state official or exploitative employers. And all these acts are described by Scott as the weapons of the weak. Where subaltern politics in the Indian context. So, in India, such everyday resistance is widely observed, especially among Adivasi, Dalit, and peasant communities. For example, tribal groups that resist land acquisition, they often refuse to cooperate with officials or reclaim forest species even though it was banned. So these acts of political refusal, they push back against the system in a minor way. Where the Dalit communities हैं, they also have their symbolic acts like rejecting caste-based surnames, asserting Buddhist identity, and boycott temples which are controlled by dominant caste. So these are example of everyday subaltern politics. Then comes resistance through cultural assertion. So cultural revival is also another political tool by which people they reform their own indigenous festival, languages, and customary law system to resist against the encroachment of dominant caste or market ideology or mainstream society. Example, the revival of Sarana religion among Adivasis or the use of folk theatre or songs in political messaging. They are example how cultural forms become acts of political resistance. But then the role of migration and refusal. So another powerful form of everyday resistance, subaltern politics, is migration. So when people are marginalized and they are unable to assert their demands, so they may exit the system entirely, migrating to cities or forest, thereby withdrawing labor, loyalty, and participation. So this silent withdrawal is a refusal to cooperate with the mainstream ideas or the structure which are perceived as unjust. फिर बात करते हैं identity, memory, and symbolism in political mobilization. Under this, anthropology emphasizes that politics is not just about institutions, state institution, laws, or policy demand. It is deeply rooted in the symbolic and cultural life of communities. And here, indigenous or marginalized people, they draw their strength from collective identity, cultural memory, and symbolism. In short, they find the much needed recourse in their own culture. So these memories, these historical memories, these cultural practices, they are powerful tools of resistance and mobilization. Of course, the symbolic capital, जो अभी देखा है, so anthropologists refer to the idea of symbolic capital, which is a concept originally developed by Pierre Bourdieu as the non-material resource like cultural identity, memory, tradition, and rituals that community use to legitimize their struggle. In other words, the symbolic capital concept given by Pierre Bourdieu, it says all such cultural attributes, all such cultural items, they are the weapon in the hands of, they are political weapon in the hands of indigenous people, in the hands of people. And these cultural markers help people mobilize based on emotional, historical, and moral authority. These provide them a unity which is necessary in any such political resistance. So, in political anthropology, the focus is on how symbols create belonging, define enemies, and provide moral clarity. How such strategies are developed by symbols, by symbolic capital. The first case study, the Gondwana movement. So, this movement, which emerged from the central Indian tribal belt, here the Gond people, they wanted to revive their cultural identity. This movement, it is a cultural resurgence movement that is deeply embedded in memory, myth, and identity. Gondwana movement is a demand for a separate state for the Gonds. And anthropology who studied this movement, they highlighted how Gondi oral tradition of the Gond people, legend of tribal kings like Shankar Saha and Raghunath Saha, and the revival of Gondi language and script, also known as the Gunjala Gondi Lipi, they are integral to political narrative. Now, the symbolic capital can be seen here. All these cultural markers, they are providing the much needed legitimacy to this movement. They are uniting people, and this cultural capital provide the Gond people, with a purpose to fight for. Where second case study, the Mizo nationalist movement. This movement, which was intensified after the devastating famine of 1959, it transformed into a full-fledged demand for Mizo identity and political autonomy. At the surface, it appears to be an insurgent movement, but anthropology revealed that it was rooted in Mizo-social ethics, their cultural symbolism, and their historical experiences. And central to this concept was a Mizo concept of Tlomungai Ana, or traditional moral code. Tlomungai Ana. Mizo में से Mizo language का concept है, which is a traditional moral code which emphasize selflessness and community service. Miso insurgent, they also invoke this ethos, this moral code, along with Christian symbolism, creating a culturally hybrid yet coherent political ideology to demand for a separate statehood. Now, कुछ global parallel है. So first, the Kanks, the Canucks, Mapuche movement. First, the Canuck independence movement from New Caledonia, Pacific Island. So the Kanak, they struggled for independence from French colonial rule in New Caledonia, and it was not just a political demand for statehood, but the political assertion was deeply rooted in cultural memory, land-based spirituality, and indigenous cosmology. And anthropologists, they show how Kanak revival of customary practices such as Pilu Pilu dances, storytelling, and the reassertion of Safari, a customary chieftainship, are deep politically acts which wanted the revival of the reassertion of their culture. फिर Mapuche की बात करते हैं. Mapuche in Chile and Argentina. So in the Andean foothills of southern Chile and Argentina, the Mapuche people, they wanted autonomy, and their struggle is an example of how cultural heritage become a tool of political resistance. Cultural heritage, cultural markers, cultural capital, all of us the same thing. And on the surface, the struggle involves contesting extractive projects like logging and mining on ancestral land. But the anthropological studies, they expose a deeper layer. वो क्या क्या है? The first, the Mapuche movement, it used the Mapudungun, which is the Mapuche language. Then they invoke the sacred landscape and gain spirits. And then ritual like Angui Latun, which is a communal prayer ceremony. In short, all such cultural markers, cultural practices were invoked, and these cultural capital, they acted as a political weapon to assert their sovereignty. Finally, the movement's emphasis on Adampu. Adampu means the traditional law, just like Tlumangai of Mizo people. This traditional law, it has governed social and ecological order of Mapuche people, and um, they invoke this. They emphasize that such traditional code should replace the mainstream law. फिर बात करते हैं political anthropology in contemporary mass movements. So again, the same concept. Political anthropology, it reveals the deeply embedded cultural, moral, and symbolic expression of collective aspiration of political demands. And this uh, no, anthropological perspective is provided by the study of a bottom-up perspective from inside the people. The first such example is Syrian uprising of 2024-25, Hong Kong's umbrella movement. The Syrian uprising of 2024-25, both of them, they are example of how uprising are deeply tied to cultural identity and symbolic resistance. So in the case of Syria, particularly in the Druze majority regions, the protests, they were not just opposing the Assad regime, uh, the previous head of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. So the Druze people, they were not only opposing him, but also asserting their own distinct cultural identity. Then in the case of Hong Kong, the umbrella movement, they used the umbrella not only as a protection against state violence, but also a symbol of defiance and the fight for autonomy. And protesters, they embrace the umbrella as cultural and political icon. If you don't know the background, so Hong Kong, it was a British colony. Then China, उसने इसके ऊपर अपना हक जमाया और उसके अगेंस्ट पीपल रेजिस्टेड, पीपल सॉट देयर ओन ऑटोनॉमी. और सेम चीज ताइवान में भी चल रही है कि ताइवानीज पीपल दे आल्सो asserting their own independence. So both of these movements, they are one is example of cultural expression, and the other the use of The social capital use of the symbolic universe to protest against the mainstream. So both the movement they highlight the intersection of culture and politics, where everyday action became powerful political statements. A global example, Occupy Wall Street and Global Solidarity Network. So यहाँ पे मैंने ये चार global examples इसलिए ऐड किए हैं क्योंकि anthropology is not just about studying the indigenous people, the tribal people. It is about studying human society, wherever the section belong to. ऐसा नहीं है कि सिर्फ ट्राइबल पीपल ही हैं, मेन स्ट्रीम सोसाइटी में भी, क्योंकि एंथ्रोपोलॉजी मीन्स द साइंस ऑफ ह्यूमन। तो जो ह्यूमन के बारे में है तो सारे के सारे ह्यूमन है। एंड दिस पर्सपेक्ट दिस मिसकंसेप्शन शुड बी डिस्पेल्ड, क्योंकि बहुत लोग जो है वो यही सोचते हैं कि एंथ्रोपोलॉजी मीन्स जो अफ्रीका के ट्राइबल्स हैं उन्हीं की स्टडी होती है। नो, यहाँ पे वॉल स्ट्रीट, द इकोनॉमिक हब ऑफ द वर्ल्ड, इसकी स्टडी भी एंथ्रोपोलॉजी कर सकता है। और भी बहुत सारे एग्जांपल्स हैं। इवन आजकल के कॉर्पोरेट के अंदर भी एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट दे आर एम्प्लॉयड, क्योंकि कुछ नए मेन स्ट्रीम आइडिया है। इवन जो फाइटर जेट्स हैं उनके कॉकपिट के डिज़ाइन के लिए भी एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट एम्प्लॉय होते हैं। तो एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट दे स्टडी एवरीथिंग अबाउट ह्यूमन। Now, the Occupy movement, which began in New York in 2011, it spread across the world with the slogan, "We are the 99%." Anthropology who studied these protests, such as David Graeber, they showed how the movement it challenged hierarchy not only in society but within the protest itself. कैसे? The movement it used horizontal decision making and consensus based meeting and the occupation of symbolic spaces like Zuccotti Park. All of these activities, all of these acts, they reflected an alternate vision of critical politics and governance. So, anthropological insight they help explain why the movement's refusal to produce clear leader of fixed demand, they were not just a weakness, but a strategic statement that emphasized participative democracy and radical equality. In short, this movement it was about the dismantling of hierarchy, about against the concentration of power, and in support of decentralization. Now, anthropology's unique contribution to understanding mass movement. So again, the same basic framework, critical science, it studies critical movements via structure, leadership, and policy. Anthropology studies the texture and experience of protests. It focuses on how people feel, what symbols they use, how communities organize themselves, and how power is enacted and contested in everyday life. चारों example है. Where some key anthropological contribution in short. First, it recognized the cultural roots of the protest symbol, like flags, symbols, songs, rituals, dress codes. Then anthropology understands the emotional and moral appeal of the movement. Then it look at the invisible labor of protest by studying how people are fed, how solidarity are built, and how wounded are cared. And anthropology also highlight the interplay between local tradition and global platform. In short, anthropology it digs deeper. It look at the real cause of the protest, what it means, what are their demands, why are they demanding it, and how are they demanding it. Now, anthropological methods की आखिर anthropology how does it dig that deeper into any such society, any such movement? So the methods are ethnography, participant observation, and reflexivity. So first, it does not study political movements from a distance. It immerses itself in the lived reality of the people. This immersive close-range approach allows political anthropology to bring out voices and perspectives that are often overlooked in mainstream political sciences, where the first such tool is ethnography that understands politics from the ground up. So anthropology is a long-term, in-depth engagement with a community that enables the researcher to understand how people live, feel, and make meaning of the world. It means to understand the political and social reality of a certain community. फिर ये केस स्टडी पहले ही बताई, Ivan Pritchard's The Study of Newer People. So centralized state structure is not there, but the kinship system, the lineage council, the ritual specialists, all of them, they play a crucial role in maintaining power. Very contemporary example, the ethnography of Shaheen Bagh movement 2019-20 in India. तो यहाँ पे again example एक ऐसा है कि anthropology does not just study the tribal society, they also study everything that is going on in human society. The Shaheen Bagh protest against CAA, the Constitution Amendment Act. So the anthropology documented how Muslim women redefine public protest through their everyday action, like sitting in protest, reciting the Constitution, cooking together, and performing resistance through care. तो ये एक न्यू पर्सपेक्टिव है, और ये पर्सपेक्टिव it could not have been found without ethnography. The second tool in the arsenal of anthropology is participant observation. So this method takes ethnography a step further. So here anthropologists not only observe but also engage. तो ethnography में तो observe करके उनके बारे में लिखते हैं, but participant observation में anthropology it seeks to engage the community member. So they attend community ritual, participate in daily life, and sometimes even join in the protests or activities of any community or movement. So, well-known contemporary example of Alpa Shah's work in Maoist movement in central India. So here, Shah lived with Adivasi communities for several months, accompanying them on forest trek, attending their festival, and listening to their account of displacement and state violence. And then she listed all of her observations in her book Night March, which offers a gripping first person ethnographic account how insurgency is rooted in long history of land alienation, broken promises, and struggle for dignity. So you can see a different perspective here. Maoist के बारे में हम लोग जो मेन स्ट्रीम सोसाइटी है वो बहुत अलग सोचती है. Now, an anthropologist who stayed with them, now उसका perspective totally different. और ऐसे perspective तभी मिलते हैं when anthropologists they stay with people, stay with such community, and they look at look at them very closely, and that's how the important perspectives are brought out. The next arsenal is reflexivity, which is knowing one's place in the field. So reflexivity means that anthropologists constantly reflect on their own identity, their biases, and the impact that will have on the research process. In short, reflexivity acknowledges that the presence of researchers can influence what is shared and how it is interpreted and what is not shared. So reflexivity is two things. First, the subjective bias of the researcher himself, and then the acknowledgement that the presence of researcher would bring out some information and some information will be hidden. For example, in the Northeast Indian context, the anthropologists who studied Naga political identity or Bodo movement, they must be sensitive to the deep historical trauma of militarization, of the imposition of APSPA, the ethnic conflict between different communities, and the broken state promises. So a researcher from Indian mainland, he might be viewed with suspicion and may not be told certain stories unless the trust is built carefully over time. Why these methods matter? So unlike survey-based studies or top-down government reports, anthropologies they often context-rich, empathetic, long-term perspective, which all such perspectives have been brought out by living among the people. For instance, in the Zapatista movement in Mexico, ethnographers have documented how indigenous leaders use rituals, native dress, and community myths craft a distinctly cultural form of resistance against neoliberal state policies. In short, the Zapatista in Mexico, these indigenous people, they were resistant against the mainstream exploitation, mainstream economic exploitation, the land displacement. And here, ethnographers, they studied how the indigenous people, they use the symbolic universe of their rituals, dress, myths, social customs, cultural capital to resist against the mainstream state policies. फिर बात करते हैं Indian context, anthropology and political mobilization. In the Indian context, the studies of Barry Alvin, D.N. Majumdar, L.P. Vidyarthi, N.K. Bose have highlighted the importance of recognizing the political agency of marginalized group and the role of anthropology in interpreting these movements. So, first such topic is early tribal political movement. So Santhal Hul of 1855 and the Birsa Munda's Ulgulan in 1899, they are the earliest example of political movement in India. So these movements were not mere expression of resistance to colonial rule. They are also intertwined with the tribal identity and cultural traditions of Santhal and Munda communities, respectively. In the case of Santhal Hul, anthropologists have emphasized that uprising was not a simply economic protest against the British. They were also reaffirmation of tribal identity and the challenge to the mainstream social order that was imposed upon them. Where Birsa Munda's Ulgulan, it was both a revolt against British colonial rule and a cultural revival movement that wanted to restore tribal sovereignty. Where there has been debate about tribal integration versus isolation after India gained independence. So this question became central to discourse on national integration, integration of tribal into the mainstream. So the integrationists, they argued that tribal communities should be brought into the mainstream Indian society so that they can be modernized, and figures like LP Vidyarthi, they advocated for such integration. Whereas uh, Warrior Alvin, who was an isolationist, who argued that the protection of tribal autonomy and cultural identity should be given a prominence, should be given a primacy. And Jawaharlal Nehru, he went with the idea of Warrior Alvin, and this led to creation of Bastar area in Madhya Pradesh and tribal subplan in development policy. And finally, contemporary tribal movement, Pathalgadi and assertion of autonomy. So Pathalgadi has become one of the most prominent example of tribal political mobilization in India contemporarily. This movement began in Jharkhand, which involved installation of large stone plaques, pathal, in tribal villages, which are inscribed with declaration of tribal autonomy, and references to constitutional provisions have also been listed that recognize tribal rights. कुल मिला के large stones are erected और उनके ऊपर दो चीजें लिखी गई. First, tribal are autonomous people, और फिर उनकी autonomy has been granted by constitution और वो constitutional provisions उस पे लिखे गए. So this movement has become constitutional symbol to assert the political demand, and it also shows that the tribal people, they have started taking recourse to legal framework in tribal activism. So here, the use of constitutional language by the Pathalgadi movement, it highlights the influence of modern political thought with indigenous movements that blend traditional tribal custom with constitutional right to assert autonomy. And in anthropological term, this movement represents a fusion of symbolic politics, traditional authority, and the legal recognition. So modern time में जो पुरानी चीजें सब साथ में है, but the tribal people, they are started taking note of the legal formalities, that if they want to fight, if they want to assert their cultural identities, then they must reference the constitutional provision, the legal provision, and that's how they are going to fight it. So it is not only a newer way of reassertion, but it also shows the flexibility and resilience of these movements, of these cultural identities, of these cultural assertion in against the mighty power of the state. So this is it. And अगर कुछ छूट गया है, you can ask me in the comment. And I want your support. Subscribe to the channel. अपने friends, fellows उनको भी बताइए और उनसे भी सब्सक्राइब करवाइए. This is it. Thanks again.